Öncelikle herkese selam. Yani yine şu an kamera açmıyorum ama aslında bir şeyler öğrenirken siz de burada olun istedim sadece. Geçen gün işte geçen yayın yapmadık arkadaşlar zaten görmüşsünüzdür çarşamba günü. Ama bu süre içerisinde biz yine görüşmeye devam ettik. Yine bana birkaç bir şey gösterdi, bir sürü konuşma yaptık. Şeyi fark etti hani o gösterdiği şeylerin arasında code diye bir şey vardı. Aslında VS Code'un bir eklentisi. Açık kaynaklı. İşte bu nedir diye biraz merak ettim. Çünkü orada ufak bir test yaptık. Hemen bir date app diye söylediğim zaman bana gün için bir yani günler için bir aplikasyon oluştursun diye söylediğimde bana çok ufak bir kod yazdı. Günleri basıyorsun çalıştırıyor, gün getiriyor sana tarzında. Hani bugün nedir tarzında böyle detaylı bir şey istediğin şekilde bir şey getiriyor sana. Detayına bakarız hatta birazdan belki. Ama sonra şey dedim ben bunu gün değil yani date değil dating. Yani buluşma aplikasyonu yap dedim bir anda böyle bir. Orada bir sürü şey üretti bu arada. Üretmedi değil ama nasıl kullanacağımı bilemedim ben büyük ihtimal veya hatalı yaptı bilmiyorum hangisi olduğu fark etmez. Bunu öğrenmek istiyorum. Yani çünkü bayağı bir şey ortaya çıkarttı aslında yani bir sürü de izin verdim ona patır patır hakkında bir sürü şey üretti. Hata varsa tekrar düzeltsin falan filan deme hakkına da sahibim zaten. Böyle o ufak tespitler yapıp şurayı düzelt, şunu yap gibi şeylerde olduğunu gösterdi bana birkaç hamleyle. Ne kadar izin verip vermeyeceğimin kontrolü de benim altımda oluyor. O yüzden hani neydi ismi? Bakalım bu nasıl çalışıyormuş kısmında. Rukot nedir diye YouTube'a yazdım. Zaten video seviyorum biliyorsunuz. Hani siz de burada olduğunuza göre bir siz de video seviyorsunuz. İzlemeyi, dinlemeyi seviyorsunuz. O yüzden bakalım neymiş bu. Çok konuşup daha fazla şey yapmayayım. Zaten Rukot için introları dinleye dinleye canım sıkılacak zaten. Haydi bakalım başlıyoruz.
Open source VS Code. One name pops up every time I make a video on an AI IDE, RuCode. It's an open source VS Code extension that can transform VS Code into an AI powerhouse to rival Cursor. What's cool is it's an open source project where you bring your own API keys, and it's very welcoming to community PRs, meaning it has some pretty unique features. After you subscribe, we can take a look. Let's get it installed through VS Code extensions, and as you can see, it adds this rocket down here, and it says, "Hi, I'm Ru." Now we do need to provide it with an API key, and I'm going to be using OpenRouter. If you haven't seen OpenRouter before, essentially it's a single API where we can use a load of different models like Claude, OpenAI, DeepSeek, Gemini, pretty much all of them. They even have an app showcase which shows you that RuCode is the second most used client of OpenRouter, second to Klein, which RuCode is actually a fork of. Essentially, from what I can tell, is people are unhappy with how many PRs were being accepted into the Klein project, despite the fact that it was open source, so someone forked it, created RuCode with a more open approach. With my API key pasted in, let's go ahead and give this a go. Now there's a ton of cool settings in here that I want to come back to. Let's just see the stock out of the box experience. As you can see, it's a pretty standard interface for these AI IDEs. We can type in our prompt down here, and we can use the @ symbol to add in some context like our files, folders, problems, even git commits and URLs. We can then control the prompt mode though, and this is where it starts to get really powerful. It comes with 3 of them out of the box. It has Code, which is the multi-purpose coding assistant. It has Architect for high-level system and design insights. And then it has Ask, which is like your chat mode for research and Q&A and deeper exploration of your code base. But it's all about customizability. You can actually add in your own modes and modify the existing ones, changing everything from the system prompt to the files that it has access to. You're even able to prompt Ru to create a new mode for you. We'll set that up in a bit. For now, we'll go ahead and use the architect mode, and I've given it a prompt to create me a Hacker News clone using Next.js, and I've provided it with a screenshot of the Hacker News front page to add in a bit more context. Now we can actually go ahead and click this enhance prompt button as well, and that's going to take it in and add in a lot more information so that for the next step, it has a lot more detail on what it needs to do. So you can see it's added in a lot more useful detail, like implement features like the story listing with points, comments count, and it said use a responsive design with Tailwind, and we can go ahead and hit enter here. As you can see, we get a nice pop-up of the task at hand, and it actually will show you as you go the amount of tokens you've used, the context window, and even the API cost. Now, you might be quite surprised when you use this with Claude, just how expensive Claude is, but it's great that we now have the option that we could choose something like Gemini or DeepSeek, which is way cheaper. You can see as it's going as well, it shows you it in this diff view over here, and because we started in the architect mode, it's actually gone ahead and created a project plan for us. Now it says it wants to create that new file, and we can go ahead and click save. Now, if we left it like this, you'd have to click save for every new file it creates. But what's great is we can actually configure the auto approve here. So if I go into auto approve, I'll say I want it to automatically approve editing files, and then I'll tick this up here. Now, next time it needs to approve a file, it won't need to ask us. Now you can see that it's created the project plan for us, so now it wants to switch into the code mode to actually start writing the code, so we'll auto approve that. What's great as well, as you can see, is in that last API request, it tells you exactly the cost of that specific task. Next, it wants to go ahead and run the create next app command. So we'll hit run command. Again, you could set this up to approve everything and you'd pretty much have an automated AI agent here. Now, interestingly, there was an error with that command because the folder I was inside of just to test this was called RuCode.
Altyazı sanki bir şey geliyor, kötü geliyor. Hemen bir refresh yapacağım. 3.26'da kaldık. Baştan da alırım ama boş boşuna şey yapmayayım dedim. Düzeldi mi bakalım. Rengi çok şey ya. Niye rengi böyle? Bir bakalım niçin böyle. Ha. 75 olsun. 50 ne ya? Yani o siyah kısmı böyle olmasın. Aynen bak pencere şey olmasın yani. Yani bunu yormasın bizi. Düzgün çevirmiyordur bu arada kesinlikle ona eminim ama yani bir araya sürekli girip ben bir şey söyleyeceğimden daha iyidir. En azından buradan devam etsin hadi bakalım.
These AI IDs. We can type in our prompt down here and we can use the @ symbol to add in some context like our files, folders, problems, even git commits and URLs. We can then control the prompt mode though, and this is where it starts to get really powerful. It comes with 3 of them out of the box. It has Code, which is the multi-purpose coding assistant. It has Architect for high-level system and design insights. And then it has Ask, which is like your chat mode for research and Q&A and deeper exploration of your code base. But it's all about customizability. You can actually add in your own modes and modify the existing ones, changing everything from the system prompt to the files that it has access to. You're even able to prompt Ru to create a new mode for you. We'll set that up in a bit. For now, we'll go ahead and use the architect mode, and I've given it a prompt to create me a Hacker News clone using Next.js, and I've provided it with a screenshot of the Hacker News front page to add in a bit more context. Now we can actually go ahead and click this enhance prompt button as well, and that's going to take it in and add in a lot more information so that for the next step, it has a lot more detail on what it needs to do. So you can see it's added in a lot more useful detail, like implement features like the story listing with points, comments count, and it said use a responsive design with Tailwind, and we can go ahead and hit enter here. As you can see, we get a nice pop-up of the task at hand, and it actually will show you as you go the amount of tokens you've used, the context window, and even the API cost. Now, you might be quite surprised when you use this with Claude, just how expensive Claude is, but it's great that we now have the option that we could choose something like Gemini or DeepSeek, which is way cheaper. You can see as it's going as well, it shows you it in this diff view over here, and because we started in the architect mode, it's actually gone ahead and created a project plan for us. Now it says it wants to create that new file, and we can go ahead and click save. Now, if we left it like this, you'd have to click save for every new file it creates. But what's great is we can actually configure the auto approve here. So if I go into auto approve, I'll say I want it to automatically approve editing files, and then I'll tick this up here. Now, next time it needs to approve a file, it won't need to ask us. Now you can see that it's created the project plan for us. So now it wants to switch into the code mode to actually start writing the code. So we'll auto approve that. What's great as well, as you can see, is in that last API request, it tells you exactly the cost of that specific task. Next, it wants to go ahead and run the create next app command, so we'll hit run command. Again, you could set this up to approve everything, and you'd pretty much have an automated AI agent here. Now, interestingly, there was an error with that command because the folder I was inside of just to test this was called RuCode with capitals, and apparently you can't create a project with that. But you can actually see that it's picked up that terminal error, and it's running a new command. So we can do that. It's making a Hacker News clone folder now within this one, and then it's running the command. If I go ahead and just spam through this configuration here, it should pick up when this command has finished. There we go, it can move on to its next step now, making another API request. As you can see, it's going to start creating my code, and that's all streaming in over here. Now, I left it going for what seemed about 2 minutes there. As you can see, it's created all of the files that it thinks it needs to create our Hacker News clone, and it's now ready for me to go ahead and run this. It wants to run the command cd Hacker News clone and npm run dev. So if I go ahead and hit run command here, I'm also going to minimize this where you can actually see that the total cost I've used up so far is 25 cents. As I said, Claude is very expensive, but we'll change that later to Gemini. Now you can see that it had an error because it didn't need to cd into that folder. There was no reason, it was already inside of it. So now it just wants to run npm run dev. It picked that error up nicely for us. And that command errored too because apparently it's still in the wrong directory. It somehow changed it. Let's go ahead and run this one, and hopefully that one works. There we go. You're going to see something really cool when this launches, and that is its browser automation. You can see here it says now that the development server is running, let's use the browser to check our Hacker News clone, and it says Rue wants to use the browser. Now obviously we could auto-approve this. If I just expand this a bit so we can see it clearer and zoom out a little bit as well, as we're going to need that in a bit, we can go ahead and hit approve here. Now what's going to happen is it's going to launch its own browser, and this way it can go ahead and pick up things like the console logs, it can see UI issues, and it can go ahead and debug these all for you. So you can see in that first screenshot there, it's seen what the Hacker News website looks like, and then it's going to make a few more actions based on the fact that it wants it to look better to match the original design of that screenshot I gave it. Like, how cool is that? It used this browser up here to see that it doesn't look exactly like the screenshot I gave it, and then when I made a load of code modifications to get it closer, and it wants to run the browser again to give it another check. So if I hit approve here, we should see the Hacker News site pop up here, and you can see it looks a little bit better with that Y having that square box around it. I think that was one of the changes it needed to make, and it's also made the header look a bit more. As you can see, it's going to close the browser and make a few final adjustments. And there we go, task completed. It actually used the browser one more time there to check the results and then make a few more changes. And this is the final result, and it's happy with that. So it says, go ahead and execute this command, open localhost 3000, and that will open it up in my browser. This is the result of that first run then, and I'd say it's done a pretty good job at recreating the Hacker News front page. But it doesn't yet have the submit page. It didn't fill this out, it just added the link to it. So let's go ahead and ask it to create the submit page. So I'll click start new task here, and you can see it's opening up a new window. And then I'll paste in, can you create the submit page now? And I'll click that enhance prompt button as well, just to add in a bit more information. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and hit enter. With that done, we now have a mock submit page. As we don't have a backend yet, it can't actually submit anything. What I wanted to show you was just how cool this browser action stuff gets. As you can see, it launched the browser, but then we can click through the steps that it took. So if I click next here, you can see it wanted to test the form validation. So it went ahead and just tried to submit an empty form, and it saw correctly that the errors occurred, so it is working as expected. Then it tested a few more things like typing in an invalid URL, and then again saw that the error message was popping up. So it's really cool how it can test that for you. It really does feel like an AI teammate. The only downside I can see so far isn't even Rucode's fault, and that is that it costs quite a bit on Claude Sonnet. You can see that submit page actually cost me 50 cents, but because we have all of the control and the power, I could have switched this to Gemini 2, and it would have cost me around 2 cents. Now, when it comes to things like inline prompting, I do believe Rucode is a bit limited because it's a VS Code extension and not a fork, so you can't really get that prompt pop-up box that you might get in Cursor. But you can still go ahead and select some code, click on the Quick Actions light bulb, and you can get Rucode to explain it, add it to the context, fix the logic. And in the Problems tab down here as well, you can actually right-click and also ask Rucode to fix it. And as you saw earlier, you can even do @ and then problems, and it will pick up these workspace problems. So that's the out-of-the-box experience that you get with Rucode, but its power really is in its customizability. So if I head back to the settings where we gave it our API key, you can see we can choose the model down here. As I mentioned, Claude is very expensive. It's $15 for 1 million input tokens, and then $3 for 1 million output tokens. So let's go ahead and change this model. You can actually type in free here and see some of the free models you have access to. Of course, they might have some limits, but super cool if you wanted it really cheap. But let's go ahead and use Gemini, as I said earlier, as I believe this one is a lot cheaper. I think Gemini 2 Flash 001 is the latest. You can see the input price is 10 cents for 1 million input tokens, and then 40 cents for 1 million output. That's 37 times cheaper than Claude. Now you can see that Gemini doesn't actually support computer use or prompt caching. Not really sure that prompt caching is going to matter based on how cheap Gemini is. There's a few more things that you can configure in these settings here. You can use a custom temperature for your models if you're into controlling that. You can set up the auto-approve settings from here as well as from that prompt input box. You can change how that browser behavior works, what viewport size it shows up in, and the screenshot quality. You can enable a sound effect for each thing that Rucode does, and then you can change some things like the rate limit, the terminal output limit, and just a load of other cool settings. But where it gets really powerful is with the prompts. If you click this book up here, you get to the prompt settings, and in here we can modify the entire behavior of Rucode. You can see we can add in some custom instructions for all of the modes. So this is where you'd add in some general rules, but then we get to the modes, and this is where it's super powerful. You can see the 3 that it's provided us with already, so code, architect, and ask, as I explained earlier. And you can see they have a role definition. So code is a highly skilled software engineer, whereas architect is an experienced technical leader. Then you can choose your API configuration. This is actually really cool because you can set up a different API.
Çok ufak bir değişiklik yapacağım. Geliyorum. Hemen şöyle bir geçiş yapalım.
API per mode. Say you had a documentation writer, you could go ahead and set that up to use the Gemini API, but then when you're in the code mode, make sure that it's using the Claude API, as that one is a lot better for coding. Now, when you combine this with the fact that it can automatically switch modes, you have pretty much my dream feature of automatically selecting a model for you. Then you can go ahead and choose the tools that each mode has access to, whether it can read files, edit files, use MCP, use the browser, run commands, and then you can provide it with mode-specific instructions. The code mode doesn't have any, but as you can see in Architect, it does have some in here. What's really powerful though, as I mentioned, you can create your own. So we click plus up here. In here, you can give your mode a name. You can choose where you want it saved to. So whether it's a project specific mode, or if you want the mode to be available in all of your projects. Then you can set up that role definition, the available tools, and also the custom instructions that we just talked about. Now with the rise of AI, that all seems like too much work for me. So what's really cool is you can actually just go ahead and prompt Rue code to create a new mode for you. So I'll create a documentation writer mode and hit enter. And when that's done, you can see it's added in that new documentation writer mode, and it's done that in a Rue modes file. So this is going to be project specific. I probably could have asked it to create it in the global settings as well. You can see in here how it's defined in JSON. If I head back to the prompts as well, we can see our new mode here of documentation writer, and you can see it has a role definition of you are a technical writer and documentation specialist, and it even has some mode specific custom instructions as well. All of this generated by AI. Now, what's really cool though is when it has these available tools, so it has edit files, you can see when you actually use the JSON settings, you can change the file regex. So this documentation writer can only change markdown files, and I could come in here and customize this for what I like. So you have complete control over how these modes work. The other great thing in the prompt settings is you can control the behavior of those support prompts that we saw earlier, like that enhance prompt button. You can see we can change the prompt that it actually uses and also the API again, so you could use a different model per each enhancement here. So if I click something like explain code, fix issues, you can see there's a different prompt for each one, and it has this nice syntax for if you want to include the user input and diagnostic text. Just so many cool customizability features. On top of all of that, it even has MCP server support. If you haven't seen these before, essentially you can set these up to control basically anything from Docker, databases, literally anything that you want to, and you can even create your own servers. What's really cool with Rue code is it has MCP server creation mode. So if you say add a new tool to, and then you give it a description to create something, it will go ahead and try create that MCP server for you. That's Rue code. Let me know in the comments what you think. I was actually pleasantly surprised at how many features it had and just how customizable it was. I think this is perfect for those developers who love complete oversight of their tools and love to dig into the fine details. Make sure to subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one.
Tabi burada hemen bitirmek istemiyorum. Yani aslında çok yorum falan da yapmadım burada. Ee, Yani kısaca bir tekrar buraya bakacağım zaten ama benim aradığım cevapların hepsini verdi mi? Çok hissetmedim yani. Belki anlatış tarzı vesaire çok şey yapamadı. Şu Rue kodu biraz daha kurcalayalım bir. Şurada yazmıştım gerçi. Şöyle bakalım aynı abimiz çıkmazsa eğer. Kimdi bu? Betterstack'ten birisi. Klein değil. Abi niye böyle yazıyor? Ben mi yanlış yazıyorum? Yok. Rue code işte. Yine aynı abimiz burada işte. Yok yani
with one of the main contributors of Rue code, and he some exciting new updates. For the people who are unfamiliar, Rue code is a fork of Klein, and it's essentially the same AI-powered autonomous coding agent, but with many more features thanks to its crowdsourced development. Rue code is something that lives directly within your editor, reading and editing files, executing terminal commands, as well as automating browser actions and so much more. He had actually taken a look at it a while ago, and it has improved significantly over the past few weeks. Today, we're diving into RuCode's latest updates, starting off with version 3.3. This is an update that brings in RuCode's code action, as well as checkpoints, and so many other new modes. Also, if you're interested in installing this, you can obviously install for any IDE that's available, like VS Code, Cursor, or Windsurf, so go ahead and install this if you don't have an IDE, and then you can go ahead to the marketplace and then simply go ahead and click on install. This will open up VS Code, and then you can go over to the marketplace and install this. Since I already have it installed to the latest release, you can then access it on the left-hand panel where you see RuCode, and then you can now start chatting with it. Now, what's really nice is that RuCode has integrated code actions. This is actually the first update that we're going to talk about. Now, code actions is where you can essentially allow you to quickly access different types of fixes and refactoring suggestions right in your editor. So you can take a look at the light bulb, and then you can have RuCode simply go ahead and explain the task. You can also have it so that it could unlock a couple of other functionalities like you saw. So in this case, since we had asked RuCode to ask what this section means, like by explaining the following code from the path, you can see that it's now working on explaining it. And then you can also have it so that it could then go back into your code and then add the new suggestions that it had created or added. Another feature is that they have introduced markdown editing. This is one of the most requested features, and it's finally here, where you can ask the architect as well as the ask mode to basically create and edit markdown files. So it would be easier for you to ever document your code directly within RuCode by having it create the markdown file for you. For example, you can then go over to the bottom left section, and then you can go over to the ask agent, and then you can go ahead and simply type in create a markdown file for me, and then you can send this in, and you're going to see that it's going to be able to go over and use the ask mode to create this markdown file. And right over here, you can see it is quickly going ahead and generating this markdown for me. Another big release is the custom file restrictions update. This is essentially where you can have custom modes that can now be restricted to a specific file pattern or a job. So this basically means that if you have a specialized AI role, like a technical writer that only edits markdown files without interfering with other code. While there's no UI for this yet, but you can ask Ru to basically set this up for you, so it's easier for you to get started with setting up custom file restrictions for the modes you set. Self-initiated mode switching is another new feature where RuCode's AI can now intelligently switch between modes based on the task at hand. For example, if you're in code mode, RuCode might suggest switching to test engineer mode once it's time to write tests. And essentially, it has the intelligence to know what sort of mode should work based off the task at hand. Also, if you don't know what modes are, this is something that I highlighted in my last update. But essentially, you can have predefined modes based off of specific prompts for RuCode to perform based off of that instruction that you had given it. Now, there's a lot of small different things that I'm not going to highlight because it would just probably take a long time to showcase everything. But in the changelog, you'll see that they have improved a lot of small things like bug fixes, and they've basically refined the extension to work a lot smoother than it would have previously. They've also introduced many new modes for supporting different model providers. You have different API providers now integrated within the settings tab. For example, you can go over to the API provider, and then you can go ahead and select between many different types of API providers like Requesty, or you also have Glama and so many other options that you wouldn't see with Line. And you can also use the VS Code LM API, which is where you can use the GitHub Copilot API that will let you use Plot 3.5 Sonnet, the O3 Mini, as well as many other models completely for free, restricted to 50 requests a month. Another huge release is the introduction of checkpoints. This is something that will roll back changes in case RuCode takes an unexpected detour. So think of checkpoints as a safety net, giving you more control over how RuCode interacts with your code, but this is where you can easily set this up within the RuCode settings to enable it. Before we get started, I just want to mention that you should definitely go ahead and subscribe to the World of AI newsletter. I'm constantly posting different newsletters on a weekly basis, so this is where you can easily get up-to-date knowledge about what is happening in the AI space. So definitely go ahead and subscribe, as this is completely for free. To do so, it's super simple. Go over to the settings tab, scroll all the way down, and then you can obviously go ahead and enable experimental checkpoints. This is obviously an experimental, so keep that in mind. But now, let's say we are working on this config file, and let's say we wanted to go ahead and expand on it. So go write a bit more in the markdown explaining what the file is, and then we can send in this prompt, and briefly I'll showcase what the checkpoint is after I've finished doing this. So you'll see right now, this is the current checkpoint, and you can actually go over to restore the checkpoint by clicking on this, or you can go ahead and view the diffs. So now you have the ability to view what sort of changes are being made, and then you can go back obviously to multiple different checkpoints to go back to a certain version where RuCode might have detoured, or if you want to go back to another generation that worked or performed better than the one that you see right now. There's also this new feature of having the ability to configure model temperature, and this is per provider config, giving you a finer control over how your AI responds in a different mode. Now, this is something that a lot of new beginners don't know about. Temperature is something that allows you to bring in more creativity or exploration based off the AI's preset of the temperature. Basically, a higher temperature will result in more creativity and exploration, whereas a lower one will be more focused on a precise and deterministic response. And you can set up multiple provider configs actually for the same model with different temperatures. So it will allow you to dynamically adjust AI behaviors based off the task. So for example, if you're working on a coding assistant, you might want to use a lower temperature for accuracy, while a brainstorming mode would benefit from having a higher setting so that you can get more creativity and exploration. And that's basically the gist of what the new update entailing RuCode is about. Essentially improving existing features and enhancing documentation to create a better user experience. Now, this is a quote that I had gotten from one of the contributors of RuCode, where he had stated that what started as tweaks decline when PRs weren't being accepted quickly grew into a community-driven project with countless enhancements. And essentially afterwards, he had stated that they're now focusing on shifting to make RuCode its own product, not just a fork, by establishing a clear direction and a structured process for future development. So that is definitely really positive for the project itself. They're going to slowly depart from what the main sort of idea of Klein is. They're going to keep on enhancing it, keeping it open source, and working on this crowdsourced development to keep improving RuCode to become an efficient and effective AI agent. But that's basically it for this update video on RuCode. I'll leave all the links in the description below. Make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, follow me on the Patreon, follow me on the Twitter, as well as going over to my YouTube channel and subscribing, turning on the notification bell, and liking this video as well as their previous.
Yani evet.
So that you wouldn't see.
Biraz daha devam edelim ya. Şey yapmayalım. Bir şey daha varsa bakalım diyeceğim ama bugün biraz erken kapatacağım gibi. Biraz kendim sıçraya belki bir şeyler bakacağım çünkü daha geçen seferki şeyimizi dahi bitirmedik. Asıl eğer OpenAI'nin işte girişiminden falan filan bahsetmiştik. Daha onu bitirmedik yani. Daha onun konusu var baktığımızda. İşte embiyosisler vesaireler, bunları seke gidiyorduk. Daha bunu bitirmedik yani şu anda. O yüzden buna dönerim büyük ihtimal daha sonra. Ama biraz hız kazanmak istiyorum. Biraz yavaş hissediyorum bugün kendimi. Hız kazandıktan sonra umarım sizle beraber devam ederiz zaten ilerleyen süreçte. Kendinize çok iyi bakın. Görüşmek üzere.